Okay. All right, let's talk about catch cans, direct injection, and forced induction engines. This is a 3.5 liter twin turbo EcoBoost engine from a 2018 Ford F-150, and it has all the problems that you would expect, or potential problems, or will have problems due to port injection and forced induction pushing gnarly stuff past the low friction rings of the pistons and directing all of that gunk directly into the input or the intake manifold, where it gets burned onto the intake valves and has no relief. The standard routing for everything in this is a port on the inlet side of the turbocharger that's just fresh air from the air filter side of the intake that could theoretically draw some air through here, but is mostly the inlet to the crankcase that then comes out at the positive crankcase ventilation port here that has a check valve in it and drawn straight into the intake manifold here. Of course, everything that gets forced past those pistons, plus all the volatiles that come off of the oil as it ages, and any moisture that's drawn in from humidity gets sucked straight in here and then splattered all over the intake valves and the intake ports where it's nice and hot and burns and varnishes and turns into gunk and eventually affects the performance of the engine. It's a commonly known source of the cold fire or cold start and misfire, as well as just poor economy and poor performance overall. So we're gonna basically split this, run this output to a catch can. The input of the catch can will receive all those vapors. We're going to try and get it in front of the radiator here, which on the 2018 is going to be a lot of work. We'll show you the 2014 version that has a much easier deal. We have to get all of this stuff out of the way. Whereas the other truck we're going to show, all of this just lifts up when you open the hood and you're all the way back here for access. But basically we'll go, all that dirty air goes to a catch can here, and then we'll come back to a T. There will be a check valve so that when this is under boost instead of vacuum, it closes that check valve and won't pressurize the system this way. The other side of that will go through a check valve to that same place on the inlet side of the turbocharger with another check valve so that air only goes that way as well. And this port now will just have a breather on it. It will just have a filter that allows fresh air to go in but blocks out some dirt, dust, birds. Alright, so we don't have to worry about birds on this installation. On the 2018 that I have here, we had to do something a little bit different. Because there's a sensor in this line between the crankcase inlet and the turbocharger side, I didn't want to mess with this line. So the line that I would have ported from the output of the catch can to here with a breather filter here, I ran up to the clean side of the air filter here. So now it can have some flow of air here. I don't think the vacuum or draw will be quite as strong as it would be if it was right in front of the turbo impeller. Impeller. And so, but it'll still work. There are still cases where this will be under a negative pressure and draw through. The other thing is, underneath all of this stuff, on this truck, this is a Canadian truck, sorry my finger's in the way, there is a motorized actuator in there that moves a set of louvers like this that can close off the airflow to the radiator, I assume because it anticipates sub-freezing air and doesn't want to overcool the engine. So there's a whole mess of stuff in there that just makes putting a catch can in front of that stuff more of a hassle than it's worth. So instead, those send and return lines, there's that T I told you about, right there, check valve going that way there, check valve going that way there. So dirty air from the crankcase comes down. The catch can now is mounted here temporarily with some zip ties with a drain valve, a little tube there, so we can drain it. You know, I do it pretty often. I drive, you know, a 200-mile trip to the southern Oregon coast sometimes, and I can get a half a cup of goop out of the other truck pretty easily just doing that. So it's still in a cooler area than being here in the hot engine compartment. The idea being that the catch can should be relatively cool, so those nasty vapors and moisture and everything condense in the can on that cold plate, settle out of that airstream before they go on to the intake of the engine. The next segment of this video will show, if you're lucky, you have the 2014, I don't know, it's a Lariat, whatever the other truck is, but it's quite a bit easier to do this on, partly because of the access you have here, and partly because it didn't have this sensor here that I don't know what it does. I don't care. I'm not going to mess with the line it's in the middle of. I'm just going to give the stuff a direction to go there to the clean side of the intake system. So this is the 18 XLT version of this catch can install. If you see people putting catch cans like over here that just vent out, like they think oil spray is coming out of their engine and they want to catch can that's baloney. That doesn't do anything. There's a number of these installs where people put these things in wrong, and they either completely defeat the positive ventilation by having the engine draw air through, and then commenters are like, well, can I use a vacuum pump to make air go through this? Well, the engine is a vacuum pump. It is sucking air every time a piston goes down on an intake stroke. You don't need a vacuum pump. You just need to plumb this right so all that air goes in the right direction. And other times people don't put these check valves in the right places, and they wind up pressurizing their crankcase and blowing out their main seals, and oil goes everywhere, and they would have been better off just not doing anything. So next little segment will show the 2014 Lariat edition that has a little bit different configuration, but not too much. All right, so the third part of this fun with catch cans is, what I told you, we take a look at the 2014 F-150 that my wife drives. There's a nice little feature here. Oops. You open this up. All that stuff that's in mine is out of the way. My wife's truck has easy access to all the radiators, transmission coolers, the intercooler, and a great place to mount the catch can. Now you have to do some kind of 90-degree bend here, otherwise this brace for that grill assembly is a little tough to deal with. But otherwise, the installation is the same, with the PCV port there going to the catch can returning to a T here. One way goes through this check valve downstream to the manifold there, using the factory fittings. The other end of the T is all the way over to the inlet of the turbocharger on this side, that instead of being strapped over to the crankcase here, we just have a filter breather there. And so it's essentially the same installation. I'd like to show you what comes out of this stuff, though. There's a reason we're doing that. Now, my wife doesn't drive crazy. She's a pretty conservative driver, so it's not like she's really pounding on the throttle, pushing those turbos hard. This is all the stuff that goes by the rings and boils off the crankcase oil as it ages and degrades, and just the moisture that gets sucked in and then recondenses. That's not stuff. It's not stuff you want going into your intake manifold and burning onto your intake valves. This is only, 1,000 miles of driving here. Put that aside. I mean, look at that. That doesn't belong going into your intake, Ford. Come on, do better. Anyway, so that's my little series on properly installing a catch can. To counter some of the goofy installs I've seen on the internet, where they just open one end of this thing and put a catch can on it, thinking they're doing anything. So, drink up.